All right, we are live. And so, Chris, just to be clear, if I attend all of these webinars, I'm going to be in really good position to answer some of the open positions at Propeller by the end of this, right?
For sure. Yeah. The question is, what's happening to open positions, right? Like we should get into that a little bit today.
Yeah, and especially in your field, there's a lot made out of accounting and finance back office, and actually one of the companies pitching at our check writers event tomorrow night is sort of a hybrid AI enabled accounting firm. And like literally first slide in their deck is the aging out of people with accounting backgrounds as a major push to add in AI in this industry. But yeah, we should definitely touch upon that.
We should, because the sort of terms and conditions of the job are changing in a really profound way. And the way that accounting recruited talent, which has worked with this really sort of black and white debits and credits kind of universe for a long time, is probably not going to be the best way to recruit talent moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. So just so everybody has a context who didn't come in on our last call, can you tell us a little bit about your role and Propeller and sort of, the background that you're coming into this discussion with?
Yeah. So Propeller is an embedded finance partner for subscale companies. And what that means is that we help companies that don't have the resources to hire 3 or 4 full-time people get the kind of quality and scalability with a smaller investment. So, and that's been the business we're 18 years old. We're 250 people on 3 continents. It's not a startup. It is it's almost a 20-year-old company. It's still small, but this has always been our service model. A lot of things have changed since we started the business. We've always been embedding teams inside companies to help them navigate these scale problems. So, what's new is sort of the technology. Obviously, that's been evolving for a number of years, but at least as it relates to this conversation about sort of what comes next and when, where, and how to embed AI, we look at that through the lens of all of the companies that we're serving. So, and it's a little bit of an unusual vantage point. So we have 300 clients that are cumulatively doing about 4 billion a year in revenue. So when I think about AI, I can think about it through the lens of Propeller and our 250 people. But the way I really think about it is, what could we do for the 300 companies doing 4 billion that they can't do for themselves? And so as we talk about this today, there's all kind of things I could talk about with respect to apps or tools or whatnot. I'm thinking about the things that we could build that would be hard for us to build if we were at a 10 or 20 or $50 million a year business.
So let's talk about some of the drivers for this. Why would someone think about, or what do you think the key drivers are as to why you think about implementing finance AI in your finance stack? Is it cost savings? Is it speed? You can get to a close at the end of the month or end of the quarter faster. Is it that hybrid improves your accuracy? Like, why should people be taking this seriously right now?
So that's a loaded question. I mean, I don't even know where to start. Well, look, things are changing in a really profound way, obviously, right? Everybody's talking about it, and everybody's talking about it because some people are freaked out, and there's a an optimist narrative and a pessimist narrative. And when you look at the entire finance function, it helps to see it as a collection of really 4 different roles, and each role has a whole bunch of tasks that live inside of it. So working up from the bottom, there's sort of basic bookkeeping. We know what that is. There's controllership, which is more structured and compliance focused, planning and analysis. And then there's the strategic piece, right? Each of those roles has a whole bunch of different tasks inside of it. But if we want to talk about saving time or efficiency in the bookkeeping role, there's all kinds of things that you can do. The easiest thing these days is probably just deploy some application that's already building AI into itself. Like Ramp is a very AI forward application that's helping out in a whole bunch of different ways. Like you don't need to go rebuild Ramp. And if you're using Ramp, you probably don't need to do a whole bunch of, complex bolt-on things around that, right? But I think there's also this tendency to just presume that AI and bookkeeping automation is sort of where all the action is. And I've just been shocked at how much room for improvement there is at the strategic side. Like I've sort of put my CFO hat back on after maybe 5 or 6 years of being the CEO at Propeller. Over the last year, I've been spending a ton of time immersed in the CFO role again to try to figure out where this is going to have impact. And I've been shocked at how effective AI has been in doing some things that I really didn't expect it to do easily. So I think we're going to see impact all across the role, and for different kinds of leaders and different kinds of roles, that we talked about across those 4 roles. Like there is no shortage of places to dig in. You want to be strategic, you can go dig in on a strategic element. If you want to be tactical and try to save money, you can do that too. But I've just been surprised at sort of the breadth and depth of the various different ways that AI is having impact.
So founders are undoubtedly being pitched tools that will replace your finance team. And then, I'm sure founders talk to other founders or CFOs talk to other CFOs and they say, well, I tried it and it didn't quite work out. Right. So there's this optimism and then, what is it? The trough of
Yeah, yeah,
disillusionment.
right.
It's sort of all happening at the same time. Where do you guys come at this? And where are you on that spectrum? And how should founders be thinking about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the track record of bookkeeping automation isn't great. Like, we were promised bookkeeping automation for like the last decade. And I think there's been $500 million invested in 4 or 5 companies that tried to build bookkeeping automation, and almost all of them are out of business now. Literally every dollar of that went to zero. And it's not for nothing. Bookkeeping is way more automated than it was. But I think the premise that somebody's going to go win that and solve it for everybody else is garbage. It isn't going to happen that way. Like this is not hard. And as the sort of the barriers to building software can continue to crumble, anybody can do this stuff. And, there are a ton of different apps. Like, can you imagine my social feed? Like, if you know what my job is, like, I'm just getting fed everything. Like, every app, every AI, everything is showing up in my feed. And it's probably worse because I click on them sometimes. And so then I just get more and more and more. I just don't like, I think most of these businesses are just looking to get a leg up from people that don't really know it. And I think when you educate yourself on what's possible, you start to realize that we can actually deploy a lot of these technologies ourselves. And to be honest, if you just sort of hire some AI bookkeeping firm to do it for you, great. Like if you're a really small company, you can get away with that. No serious business is doing it. These apps and the sort of, the kind of bolt-on analytics layers that sit on top and purport to automate everything, it's not working for serious companies. Serious companies just aren't doing that. What is working are some of these AI native systems of record, the 800-pound gorillas in emerging company ERP are QuickBooks and NetSuite. And, they might not be sort of the fastest moving AI enablers, but it's all going to trickle down. Like nobody's going to invent something that QuickBooks can't eventually deploy. And NetSuite is actually pushing the boundaries in ways that would surprise people. But there are 3 different AI native platforms now that have real traction in the market: Rillet, Campfire, and Dual Entry. They are serious products, and they can't all do all the things that QuickBooks or NetSuite can do. But it's crystal clear that they're going to get traction, and those platforms are here to stay. Like that's going to be game changing. But it's not going to do it all for you, at least not anytime soon. So I can a couple steps ahead to a universe where a ton of this stuff is automated and, our sort of like dependency on certain roles is dramatically reduced. But at the end of the day, we've got to be accountable. And in order to be accountable, you have to have context. You have to know, what conversations are happening inside the room. And that's where it's really helpful for us to be embedded. So, I think the narrative that AI is going to profoundly change and improve the finance function is, I believe in it 1000%. I don't think you're going to be able to just sign up for some service that, makes all your problems go away. And in fact, I think if you do, you're probably going to underinvest in what you need to know. You've got to learn this stuff. Like, you can't not learn it. And you got to start somewhere. And I think in most cases, there's a threshold where it's clear that you're going to be a serious company. You need serious financial infrastructure. You got to do the work.
So if I'm thinking about how ready I might be to implement some AI in the different parts of my finance stack, and maybe it's worth sort of taking off the different parts, what would you say is sort of a requirement before you started layering in automation and agents and other tools? And let's start with just basic bookkeeping. What are sort of the basics? Like, don't start layering AI into your bookkeeping process unless.
Yeah. So I'll come back to the bookkeeping specific question, but just as table stakes, two super critical things that you need to focus on. One, data hygiene, and two, your people. So the data hygiene piece, well, the two of them together are really serious impediments to success. It's sort of there's the data dumpster theory, or garbage in, garbage out. If you feed a mess into AI and ask it to make sense out of it, you're not going to get great results. And so, at the bookkeeping level, I think the easiest approach is to adopt tools that have AI built into them. If you're using QuickBooks, you want to have a nicely structured chart of accounts. If you've gone through 3 or 4 different bookkeepers in the last 18 months, your data is probably pretty messy. You've been coding transactions in different ways. It's like an archaeological dig sometimes to try to figure out what was actually happening inside these businesses, because they go through these like different eras of human oversight. That can be tricky. For most smaller businesses, the value of the historical data is somewhat limited. So just getting strong architecture, just getting an organized chart of accounts, and not worrying too much about the cleanup. Like, we had an inflection point on January 1st where everything that happened last year was last year. And now we can kind of clean up the books and get it organized for 2026. Like, that's a good starting point. So, so at least on the bookkeeping side, I think just having order in the structure of the chart of accounts is really helpful. The other thing is process. And so this is probably more true for larger companies. There's an unbelievable amount of drift in process. And I would say that we didn't even fully appreciate this at Propeller until we started trying to, deploy some of these automation tools at Propeller. And like, standardization is literally built into the name. It's called Propeller Industries. It's this idea of a factory and efficiency. And we thought that, we had all these documented procedures. When we actually went to deploy AI, like, we started out in payables because that's a lot of the transaction volume. And we started building a tool that would sit on top of like Ramp and Bill.com and just handle the exceptions more efficiently. And there were all kinds of things that we could do to make that process better. And what we discovered as we, went across our 300 clients is that even our own processes just had a ton of drift. Like, people are adaptable and they're resourceful and they're resilient. All those things are great. But when we tried to standardize process, we realized like our processes are not even remotely as standardized as we think they are. And so that really just required like a, big rethink, right? And this it's a good example of the kind of challenges that you can get if you're trying to build sort of enterprise grade AI automation, on top of a inconsistent set of processes. The other thing I want to talk about is on the people side, and we alluded to this a little bit before. Accounting in particular attracts a certain kind of person, like the sort of absoluteness of the sort of black and white accounting universe is like very appealing to some people. Like, there's not a lot of gray area. And so a lot of people that are attracted to the profession like it because you follow this clear set of rules that hasn't changed much in the last 2,000 years. And this is, and there's, especially in controllership, which is a really compliance focused role, there's a lot of concern, as there should be, around following the right process and getting the numbers right. when you try to introduce AI into an environment like that, it can be really difficult for people. Like we had a director at a very successful client, like a couple 100 million in revenue, grew there really quickly. We went to bring some of our AI enabled process to her, and she said, our auditors are KPMG and they told us that we can't use any AI. Like, okay, well, I appreciate the concern for the compliance and that focus. Like KPMG is using a lot of AI. I mean, they are
Well, they
really,
just made a huge announcement about it, so
yeah. And so it's like, but that's a good example. Like I have some empathy for that too. Like A for effort, you want to do the right thing. Like, and they're not suggesting don't use AI, but you want to put some structure around it. And so you really need to, my point is like data dumpster bad, but the people are a really big part of this. And if I want to get somebody, who's wired for compliance to start to experiment with tools, I have to get that person comfortable with the security. Like, is it okay to actually load our financials into Claude? You just have to have a conversation about that. And, I think good people are experimenting with this stuff. So if they can't do it at work, for sure they're doing it at home. I think almost everybody has some familiarity with it, but companies that are thinking about sort of starting that AI process would do well to sit down with their team and just establish some ground rules, like the basic training. Let's get people comfortable. Let's come up with a sandbox environment where, we can explore and experiment. And I think there's so much that you can do, and it's so different across these different roles and different tasks that like it matters less where you start or what you do specifically. You can find a place to start with almost anybody in any role where whatever's important to them, like there's some jumping off point where they can start to introduce AI.
what is the right way for companies to sort of think about the onboarding of AI? And some of the notes that we put together beforehand, it made me think of something that I'm even doing in my own bookkeeping. Is it like I have a coaching practice, and the coaching practice, people buy packages, but then they use those packages over a period of time. And so there's sort of a mismatch between the time they purchased it and then the time they actually used it. And it becomes this reconciliation process. And so one of the ways that I actually used AI is like I downloaded my calendar and downloaded the purchases and was basically like, match these two. There's no way I'm going through these things by hand, but give me a sense of like what was used in what month. And those aren't necessarily bookkeeping or finance specific tools, but they're sort of data cleanup tools. And I feel like that's the sort of first level of things that people can be doing internally that feels like table stakes that might make your job or the finance team's job a lot easier, to a layer of processing on top of like original docs and things that output from your systems.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I can think of some that I have very recently that are similar. Our teams are using it a lot for that purpose, where you have one set of information comes out of Stripe or Shopify, different set of information comes out of your cash accounts, or like with revenue, you've got all these different contracts and they're all structured in slightly different ways. And what revenue can I recognize under ASC 606? Like my default state for all of this stuff is to load it into AI and ask it, like, can you help with this? What should I do? What do you recommend? And the process to just set up, like we're using Claude. We have enterprise Claude, which is great. And then it has memory and across projects, like you can share projects with people. So I can load in all sorts of context. It knows who I am. It knows how I like to save files with a consistent set of names. It knows what Propeller is. It knows who my colleagues are. When I load in a disparate set of data, it has a lot of context now. Like it knows what the firm is doing, like, and it can make all sorts of observations that I might not make. And those things might be directly related to finance and accounting, or they might not. Like I spent probably 45 minutes the other day trying to improve our CRM, and we use Salesforce, and we've got we've got information in all these different places. I've got all my contacts in LinkedIn and we've got current clients and former clients. We have all this information in PitchBook about all of our clients, investors, and all the different ways that we can like start to appreciate, how we might work with a company that we're not yet working with. And I mean, it's hard to get info out of Salesforce. It's like a 1,600-pound gorilla. It's not even 800-pound gorilla. And in 45 minutes, like what I got out of this thing was remarkable. It was almost like a personal CRM. And this was just from a Claude project. Now I can actually put that into a folder structure inside Claude code and effectively turn it into an app. We can use the Claude capabilities to go into Granola and pull notes out of a conversation that happened, and then go into Asana and see what's in our to-do list, and then go into SharePoint. Like if you'd told me a year ago, when I signed up for an AI MBA class a year ago, it was almost exactly a year ago, because I was thinking, I can't ignore this anymore. Like I gotta bite the bullet. And it's I'm just sort of realizing that was only a year ago now, right? It was like 6 weeks and, hour a day, and you've got some projects and stuff. It was like nothing fancy, but it had this incredibly profound impact. And, if you'd told me at that point that I would be, essentially writing code in Claude code, or, I spend a couple hours a day in AI now. And there's very little that I think of as important that I don't run through it. And it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter with every interaction. And the kinds of examples that you just cited are it's probably some of the most, when you talk about the specific use cases, how can I help with bookkeeping, or how can I help with my board decks? Like, I think what you start to miss is that it can help with way more than that. And I think just getting to that starting point where you start loading, you start engaging with it more and more, and you start to fill up its memory, and you start to appreciate how powerful it can be. Like narrative that it's sort of either or, right? It's either all AI or no AI, like ignores like the funnest piece of it, which is sort of how can we embed ourselves with it, and use it to do all the day-to-day stuff.
So, a broader question, just from a professional services firm that also has some software around it. If companies are using some of this stuff to improve their internal processes, and you are also doing the same thing, at some point there's a savings of time. And I'm curious how you think about where the savings of time will fall.
Mhm.
Is it likely? I mean, we're seeing whether you call it SaaS apocalypse or, uh,
Sasmageddon.
yeah, yeah, catastrophe was that's my favorite one so far. I
That's
heard
a,
that
I
on
like that one.
the Odd Lots podcast. And they're sort of talking about what this will ultimately do to the pricing of these services. And on one hand, you can be sort of a little bit more optimistic and say, okay, by providing these tools and hybridizing your offering, you can now, in theory, save your customer headcount that they would otherwise be, having on their team. And maybe you should get sort of a piece of that. On the other hand, you might think, well, if your customers do a better job of streamlining their internal processes, like working with them will be easier and maybe take less time on your part. Where do you see the use of AI in the closing process and the financial stack process increasing margins or saving costs on sort of both sides of the table?
Yeah. So there's a lot that we could go into around that. And um, I think one of the starting points is my premise for our business is that we need to be prepared for our sort of traditional revenue engine to degrade. I could use other sort of words for it, but like billing by the hour is not going to make a lick of sense. And it doesn't even create the right incentives for us to be aligned with the interests of our customers. Like my expectation is that cost per transaction is going to crater over the next couple of years, right? Like the cost to pay a bill or the cost to do whatever. But this is sort of where and we're going to have to adapt our pricing strategy. Like we're way into a bunch of conversations about how to be more transparent so that clients can see the transaction costs coming down, because everybody's going to want to believe that, that has to be the inevitable outcome. And if we just try to sort of obfuscate it so that, hopefully people don't notice and we can squeeze as much juice out of the lemon as we can until they wake up, like, forget it, game over. But the other side of this is the Jevons paradox piece of it, which is that, as the cost to do the schlep work decreases, we're free to do all sorts of interesting things. And this is kind of where part of our earlier conversation comes into play. Because if you think about what a CFO gets paid for, it's kind of a blended rate. Like half the work that a CFO does is just getting baking the donuts, right? Just get the close done and get the board decks done and all that other stuff. Like that's going to get way, way easier. And, you're going to need less and less of a CFO to do it. And the reality is, if you're paying a CFO, I don't know, $250,000 a year, like you're massively overpaying them for a bunch of that stuff, right? But maybe 10% of that work you're massively underpaying for. Like a small piece of that work is actually unbelievably valuable, such that, $250,000 a year feels like the right number. Like AI is gonna blow that whole thing up, right? The CFO isn't going to need to spend as much time schlepping, which means that the CFO is going to be expected to spend a lot more time doing that strategic stuff. But you know what? Like they're not all great at that because it's only 10% of the job. Like you can actually be just okay at the strategic stuff because the way that we define the job today is this sort of hodgepodge of all these different things. So it's like, okay, well, that's our opportunity. Like if I'm thinking about that across, 300 clients and 4 billion plus a year in revenue, like the people that we bring to the table need to be nails on the strategy. Like we're going to go figure out how to automate all that stuff. But like, if you're now like an orchestrator of the AI and the storytelling and your job is to absorb the context from all those critical conversations, like to see the things that the SaaS companies don't see because they're just tools. Like you're in the room when like the investment decisions are being made and what the CEO is like after a bad day. Like that's not something that the SaaS companies are going to get, right? That's the really critical context that enables you to actually be able to give better guidance, which, we want to think that that's always been the job. It's always been a small piece of the job. But a year from now, I think that's a way bigger piece of the job. And if we can do a good job of that, like I'm not worried about our revenue, right? Or even if our revenue comes down a little bit, like maybe it's a hell of a lot more profitable because it's just adding more. Like I would be thrilled to have a business that's like a little bit less revenue, but better value for its customers and more profitable. And I don't have like $100 million pref stack, that the SaaS companies do. It just kind of makes it a little bit easier for us to actually go execute on that opportunity.
So before we jump, I want to talk a little bit about vendors and software. There's a question in the chat about lightweight FP&A tools for runway projections, especially for very early stage startups. If you are a finance leader, what are the types of things you should be demanding from vendors now? Yeah, what questions should you be asking so that as the AI gets better and better and these tools get better, that you don't have to rip out what you just put in this year because some new thing comes down the pipeline and you wind up buying 3 different platforms in the next 3 years because they're all in this AI arms race together?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's probably different for different categories. Like if you're looking into the general ledger platforms that I was talking about earlier, I think it's a different conversation than if you're just looking for like a cash forecasting tool. I think sort of the table stakes there are data quality. Like what condition does our data need to be in for your tool to work? And, I think it's from what I can tell, it's a little difficult to actually get an honest answer out of the salespeople on the other end of those conversations. There's a lot of trial and error happening right now. And I'm here for it because I think some of these tools are really helpful and they're adding a bunch of features. Like we're actually, we're customers of a bunch of them, like where we can see something that like, we don't think makes sense for us to build, we're signing up for them. So I encourage people to, experiment, with some of these. But I think I would be on the lookout for sort of the over promising, under delivering. Like a lot of these tools are doing things that you're going to be able to do yourself within the next 12 months. As these models continue to evolve, there's all sorts of things that you can do with Claude Code inside Excel that, a lot of these firms do sort of like they, they, they can sort of dumb it down and make it one click, or you can just spend a couple hours learning how to build, an HTML dashboard in Claude and just go build your own and then just update it every month. So, I feel like I'm not wholly answering your question, but I think the premise behind a lot of these tools is sort of a one-click solution. I see very few of those working.
Well, and I
Call
think
other founders and ask what they're using. Get recommendations from people you trust, because there's just so much noise out there. It's hard to find the signal these days.
well, and I think part of that's the benefit of having these CFO quality folks too, because if somebody's selling you a black box and it's spitting out answers, if you don't have a subject matter expert to interpret the answers, you're not going to
You
be
just
able
don't
to
know. Yeah.
tell whether something just looks off or getting a sense of what it's doing. I mean, it's interesting to see, for example, a software developer code with Cursor or any other tools, they kind of know what it's doing. The most efficient person is the person who knows how to do it themselves, but is using it as a shortcut or a time saver, not someone who has no clue what the output should be, because those folks can't debug or, sort of point it at the right direction.
Yeah, and there's a legitimate question about what happens in a world where you can just ask AI to build a 13-week cash flow. So I can feed a bunch of inputs into AI and I can ask it to build a 13-week cash flow. Like, if I hadn't been a CFO for the last 35 years, like, how am I going to know if that's actually right? And how does anybody learn that if over the course of the next 5 years, that's all anybody does? Like, who's actually going to learn how to build the unit economics, like how to check whether it's right? So you're right. I mean, I think I take it for granted because I'm surrounded by a bunch of domain experts that can look at this stuff and be like, that doesn't make sense. They might not even know why it doesn't make sense, but they can look at the numbers and be like, nah, that can't be right. But that's actually, this like falls into the absolutist narrative around AI. A lot of the stuff I get back from AI is not right the first time I get it back. Like the first time Waymo tried to build a self-driving car, it was probably a total disaster. But like the key here is the iteration. You got to think of it as this like interactive process that's going to be improving over time. MIT said only 5% of AI initiatives are working, right? And this was like, I don't know, 9 months ago. Like, okay, there's been a bunch of people have attacked that, but like, what's really happening there? A lot of people are investing a lot in AI that just isn't working yet. And a lot of that investment, like if it was inside a software company, we'd just be calling it R&D. It's like, it's CapEx. Like, I had to do something 1,000 different ways in order to like figure out, or maybe 100 different ways. Like, I did it 100 different ways wrong in order to figure out how to do it right. But like, as soon as you figured out, how to do it right, well, now that's actionable. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's kind of the mindset that everybody should be bringing this. I've done a whole bunch of stuff over the last year that didn't work the first time I tried it. And then you stick with it and you iterate, and you'll just be shocked at what you can get it to do.
So, just as a takeaway, if I am let's call it Series B, maybe even Series A, finance lead, and I'm thinking there's got to be something in the way that we do things that I can make easier, better, faster, cheaper using AI. What would you recommend that they go and do? What is the conversation they should have with their team? If they have a couple of hours to carve out, like, where do they start? And just plotting out what's the first place that they should go after or think about?
Yeah. The very first thing is to just be a customer yourself. Like, go, if you haven't already done so, if you're not already familiar with the basic concepts, just force yourself into some sort of a class or some sort of a structure where you just get the basics. Prompting, security, data hygiene, like, these things are everywhere now. So they're actually really easy to get, but like, you gotta sort of eat your own dog food. So just get personally committed to it. And it seems like it's going to be harder than it is because of all the noise. Like, it's actually, it's just not that hard. And there's so many different ways that you can adopt it. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is just sit down with your team and just come up with a plan, get them trained, like figure out who's resistant and who is like who your sort of early adopters are if you have them, and just figure out a reasonably secure way to go experiment with stuff. And you'll be shocked like how little you have to teach people before they actually start to find various different ways to use it. The stuff that's going to work, the stuff that's going to resonate for your different team members and different roles is probably going to be a function of like their own appetite for learning and doing things in different ways, and then wherever their pain points are. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like that's probably an obvious answer, but like it wasn't obvious to me and I was looking for it. My hunch is that a lot of finance leaders are experiencing a similar dynamic.
Gotcha. So, Chris, thank you very much for your time. Chris Fenster, student of AI, consumer of AI, user, optimist, pessimist, or
We have this conversation about like whether it's a Terminator or an Iron Man suit. And like I think the Iron Man suit is at least today, that's what lands for me. That's what's really resonating. So it's not like an either or thing. It's both together.
well, and I think you said it best is like enabling everybody to focus on the 10% of things that they add the most actual value to, and where they can contribute the most, where they're best at, and trying to eliminate the 90% of the stuff that is not value add is
Yeah.
really the goal with a lot of this stuff. And that would be great if we could do that.
Yeah. Here's hoping.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Charlie.
Bye bye.